All right, hopefully that was loud enough. I'm sure I'll be using it a lot tonight. Welcome to the March 11th Arlington Redevelopment Board meeting. We are going to open the public hearing for 2019 annual town meeting for Articles 6, 7, 8, and 9 this evening. There is a sign-up sheet in the back of the room. If everyone could sign in, especially if you plan on giving testimony. I have a feeling there are going to be a lot of you that wish to speak this evening, so we're going to do it in a very orderly fashion. I'm going to call on names. If people come in late, at that point I'll allow people to raise their hands and speak. Also, in the interest of keeping things open and moving along in a timely fashion, any comments, questions, murmurs, anything, please keep it until I open the public comment period. I am going to have staff present all 4 articles at once, and then I'm going to move immediately to public comment. People will be allowed to speak. We have a lot of people. Board rules allow me to give you 4 minutes each, maybe on a timer tonight, depending on how many people have signed up, but you'll all have a chance to say your piece, no matter what, as far as public comment goes. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jenny Raitt and Aaron Zorko to give the presentation.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask that have to use the microphone, or if you don't have one, everybody to speak loud so we can hear you?
Yes, sir.
We're gonna switch to this after I'm done the presentation. Can everybody hear me this way, or do I need to hold the mic?
As close as you can.
Oh, yeah, that's what I thought. Good evening. I'm Jenny Raitt. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development for the town. I'm going to walk us through the warrant articles 6, 7, 8, and 9. I'm actually going to walk us through, sort of as an introduction to the articles, what brings us here this evening. And then actually Aaron Zorko, who's the Assistant Director, will walk us through the step-by-step components of the actual amendments that we're proposing to the bylaws. Okay? So we're here tonight because this began with as a discussion through the master plan process. How many folks in the room participated in the master plan process? Came to a meeting, filled out a survey, read it, something. Great, cool. Many of you, but not everybody in the room. The master plan is a document, of course, that's on the town's website for those of you who have not seen it before or are not familiar with it, as is the housing production plan. The master plan was adopted by the Redevelopment Board in 2015, and it was also endorsed by town meeting in that same year, at annual town meeting. And the housing production plan actually followed in 2016, adopted by both the Arlington Redevelopment Board and the Select Board, and then it was approved by the Department of Housing and Community Development. The master plan is a long-term plan for the town. It's beyond 5 years, 10 years, 15 years out. The housing production plan is shorter term, it's 5 years long. In general though, the main point I wanted to make about the master plan is that it was about encouraging this town to plan for change. Change is inevitable, it's going to happen, and the best thing that we can do is make a plan for it. And that's what brought folks together to come out to multiple meetings over the course of 2 years in neighborhoods throughout the community, people who participated in visual preference surveys, people who participated in all different kinds of workshops. Everybody knew that they were there to plan for change, which would ultimately result in healthier neighborhoods, a stronger local economy, enhanced civic amenities, and a better quality of life, not just for people who are living here, but for people who would be here, living here in the future, as well as our future economy and businesses. So with that, as part of this process, we are focused primarily on the health of our business districts and our higher density residential districts. And with that, we also looked at wanting to create a broader mix of housing types and mixed uses, which included potentially taller buildings and a reduction in square foot per dwelling unit to be desirable in select locations. What came from the master plan was a clear message that we want to make sure that our R0, our R1, and R2. Those are the lower density residential districts in this town that are about 95% of the community in terms of the land area, that those would be protected, and that has various meanings, and that we would focus our development on areas that had access to transit, access to other types of amenities that I've just mentioned here. And those are predominantly in our R4, 5, 6, 7, and all of the business districts. So the things that we're talking about are about those areas only. Now they all, of course, abut lower density residential districts, and some of the things that you'll hear tonight relate directly to that. And so we want to hear what you think about that. We realize that that's causing a lot of questions and concerns, but let me walk you through what it all means. The visual preference survey indicated to us that there were various desires in the community. We had a zoning audit which basically looked at the existing bylaw at that time, and it identified that there were many barriers to achieving that desired outcome in terms of the built landscape. Those threats and opportunities that were also identified in the process transformed into goals and strategies that the town could use to move this town forward into the future. And it led to the creation of the housing production plan. Why? Because that is one of the first steps in that section of the housing and residential development section of the master plan that we now have handouts of. Thank you, Patricia Warden. Which notes that the housing production plan is very critical, including affordable housing, that we need to achieve those goals in order to move it forward. And diversification of our housing stock should happen along major corridors while protecting open space and the lower density residential neighborhoods. The housing production plan talked about a diverse, economically diverse place. But it noted that housing prices are increasing faster than incomes. We're not doing a good enough job addressing housing price points for people at all different levels. And on top of that, housing is older and in need of updating. And not just the housing, the commercial buildings and structures as well. There's an unmet demand, it noted, for a range of housing types in terms of units, the type, and level of affordability. We flowed very quickly into master plan implementation in 2015 after the plan was adopted. And in 2016, for those of you who are town meeting members, how many of you are in the room? Yay. Hi, town meeting members. You remember 2016 if you were on board. We adopted mixed-use zoning and a parking reduction that we hoped would bring us into the future and do the things that I'm talking about. But we've actually had really limited results since it was adopted. Only 30 residential units and 6 commercial units so far. And some of these that are on the board here are not actually built yet. Recodification came in 2018. So in 2017, we didn't have any big zoning amendments. We had some that related to those protections in residential neighborhoods, but we did not focus on any other changes that were very significant. These proposed amendments, however, are really about the mismatch between what's in the zoning bylaw requirements and our built environment, particularly around lot size, but around many other issues as well. The number of requirements and limitations that exist in our zoning bylaw ultimately suppresses opportunities for property owners to develop in the R4, 5, 6, 7, and in the business districts for both multifamily and mixed-use development. What we're talking about here with these amendments are 3 things. Well-designed buildings, we want that too. I know that there's precedent for things that look one way. We want good design. That's what this board does as part of their environmental design review process. That's through a special permit. And through that special permit granting authority, they have the capability to do many different things to improve upon design. We want that. We want to know what that means to you as well. They also have an accompanying level of design standards that already exist for our commercial and industrial areas in this town. The second thing is it's multimodal. We are trying to reduce dependency upon auto uses, but we realize that it can't happen like that. We know that, but we have geared and targeted these amendments around making active transportation a priority and not to design around only one transportation mode. We're making a point of that, and you'll see that if you come back to a future hearing where we're going to talk about bicycle parking. And the third one is about amenities and housing diversity. These amendments would occur in places where there's already ample access to existing parks and green spaces, public and people places, heritage, preservation, and integration around community, cultural facilities, civic facilities. We've got it all in these locations. A lot of us live close to Arlington Heights, the center, East Arlington, and on our major corridors. But we need to deal with housing diversity. It has to include a range of housing types, tenure, which is ownership and rental, and price points. The zoning project that we did started in earnest in spring of last year. And through that, we did 5 things. We conducted a continued zoning analysis. We went in deep on a parcel analysis. And then we did massing studies, which basically looked at what you could build on sites throughout town in select locations. It developed recommendations, which then turned into the zoning recommendations. And then it also continued with a build-out analysis and visualizations, as well as a shadow study, which we're going to share tonight. So when we're talking about these districts, these are the districts. Everything else that does not have a color or a darker shade on it is the R0, R1, and R2. We are not talking about zoning amendments in those locations. The parcel zoning analysis essentially highlighted for us that currently in the locations that I just mentioned in those zoning districts, there are the minimum lot size per unit in existing zoning requirements actually creates a large number of nonconformities throughout the business districts and the residential districts. With these potential changes, we bring more lots into conformity with the zoning bylaw. That's good planning and land use practice and land use policy. Lastly, we looked at what we could look at with the parcel, the more in-deep dive on specific parcels, and we noted that with all of the requirements, the suppression of development is very extraordinary, whereby everything from parking requirements to buffers to yard requirements and open space requirements makes for a challenging development site. So that means redevelopment is challenging. When I talk about development, I'm not just talking about building a new building. I'm also talking about preservation of existing structures and potentially building upon them. So we looked at a couple of scenarios and visualizations. These are, of course, rough sketches of things that could potentially be, which would be larger story buildings, larger structures, but would still have access to many amenities around a neighborhood. This is a typical mixed-use site in a B4 district, for example. Same from a street view. And then a typical residential site in an R5. Many buildings in the R5 already have this level of height, if not greater. And you can see here actually in the slide, there's in the image, there are balconies, there's a rooftop, roof deck going on. Those are things that we are considering in these amendments as potentially counting as contributions towards open space. This is the typical mixed-use site in a B4 in terms of the shadow study. So one of the areas that we're looking at in the next public hearing is a height buffer being potentially lowered when it's adjacent to a lower density residential district. Has minimal impact depending upon the height of the building to its neighbors, depending upon the time of day, as you can see here. And this is what it looks like on the R5. The build-out analysis told us that in our existing zoning, we actually have room to grow. We are not fully built out. I've heard that a lot. We are fully built out. We don't have room. The existing bylaw is actually about 60% effective overall. Why is it not as effective as it could be? Because of these additional suppressions and requirements on the various sites that I talked about and our inability to achieve unit production goal and to create new homes for people across the spectrum, across different types. So across each, I realize this is a lot to digest right now, so we have actually posted this information as part of a memo from the consultant who helped us with this study and this work. So you can read more about the analysis and you can read more about the methodology behind it. And you can also see these visualizations and the shadow studies as well. So in our current residential for the build-out analysis, the total allowed units across all of these zoning districts, mind you, this is a fraction of the total town, is about 6,986 units total. Total that are allowed that could be affordable would be 1,048. Our projections based upon the amendments would bring that up to 9,948 units, of which under our current zoning, 1,492 could be considered affordable. In the commercial zone, the current occupancy rate of commercial units in Arlington is actually 98.8% per CoStar. I realize that there are places where we look around town and we say, what's going to happen there? What's going on in that location? There's turnover happening. But ultimately, the occupancy rate is totally very high, overarchingly. Commercial space is actually not allowed in any of the residential districts in these proposed, in the existing bylaw or in the proposed amendments. So the total square footage of commercial space is 909,250 square feet. So Articles 6 and 7, they address the mismatch between the zoning bylaw and the built environment, getting at the minimum lot area and the minimum frontage. They also make adjustments to increase the possibility of multifamily and mixed-use development by also looking at maximum height and stories and minimum setbacks. This is the entire wording of the article. Article 8 is aiming to increase multifamily in R4, 5, 6, and 7, and in the business districts, and mixed-use development in the business districts. It creates a greater level of flexibility in achieving open space on a lot by removing a very fixed dimensional requirement in usable open space and shifting that requirement to other potential areas where there could be a positive contribution both to the people who live on that site as well as to the contribution of overall open space. And this is that. 9 is about expanding the number of individual units in a townhouse structure. Right now, that number is lower than it could be. We are proposing something that would make it greater than that. So it means that it would allow for smaller overall units and lower minimum square footage homes, which people are looking for and desire. So with that, I'm actually going to switch it over to Erin, who's going to walk us through each one of these amendments in a little detail, and then we'll get moving into the comments. Thank you.
Just need to switch the presentation to PDF. So, I'll start with Article 6. So the first part of Article 6 is to amend the descriptions of the R5, R6, and R7. So you can see that on the screen, and as I scroll down, you'll see the change for Article 7. This is posted with the ARB's agenda online. There were some copies at the back, but if you want a hard copy, please visit me in the planning department. I'll be happy to print it out for you. So there's the revisions to R5 and R6. The next section is density and dimensional changes to reduce the minimum lot area, the minimum lot area per unit, the minimum lot frontage for 3-family dwellings, townhouse structures, and apartment conversions in the R4 district, for townhouse and apartment buildings in the R5 district, and townhouse structures and apartment buildings in R6, and for any permitted structure in the R7. That will only be residential. So I'll go slowly. So you can see on the board under R4, there are the revisions. In general, across the board, there are reductions. I'm gonna keep scrolling. There's R5. Again, reductions, as you can see in the strikeout and the underline. And then R6 and R7 are just below that. The next section is to adjust the front yard, side yard, and rear yard for 3-family dwellings, townhouse structures, and apartment conversions in the R4 district, townhouse and apartment buildings in the R5 district, townhouse structure and apartment buildings in the R6, and any permitted structure in the R7. So I'll go slowly. So you can see here in the R4, the changes for the front yard, side yard, and rear yard. R5, R6, and R7. In general, as I said, there's reductions. We're also, as you can see in the R5, R6 and R7, there are some complicated calculations that we're streamlining by making it a hard number. And then here is an added exception to the side yard requirements for R6 and R7. What it states is that there's no side yard required at the side lot lines for townhouse structures, apartment buildings, or office structures in R6 or R7 when that lot abuts a business district. Okay, next, increase the maximum height in feet, maximum stories, and maximum floor area ratio for the same uses that I've been talking about. So townhouse structures, apartment conversions, and apartment buildings. So I'll scroll down and start with R4. So revisions to the townhouse structure and apartment conversions. R5, separating out specifically townhouse structures and apartment buildings from other residential uses. R6, townhouse structures, apartment buildings, and offices. And then in R7, any permitted structure. So that's Article 6. Again, Article 6 focuses on multifamily. Article 7 focuses on mixed use in the business districts. Article 6 is R4 through R7. The changes for mixed use are in the business districts. So there's the text of the article, real quick. So the first item is to reduce the minimum lot area per unit for mixed use on lots greater than 20,000 square feet in the B2 districts. You'll notice that in the mixed use categories that I'll scroll through, it's often divided between less than or equal to 20,000 square feet or more than 20,000 square feet. That was the amendments that Jenny had mentioned that were passed in 2016. So there you go. That's the revision, the minimum lot area per unit. So the next item, as part of this article, is to reduce the front yard and the side yard requirements for mixed use in the B1 district. And there you are. So it is decreased. So these are, the next item of this article is dimensional and density requirements to increase the maximum height in feet and the maximum stories for mixed use in the B1, B3, and B5 districts, and then to increase the maximum floor area ratio for all mixed use projects in the business districts. Sorry, my scrolling ability is suffering right now. So here you go. In B1, you can see mixed use. In this case, it's not divided by lot size. B2, that's the division by lot size that I had mentioned earlier. And you can see the increases in FAR. In the B2A, increases in FAR. In B3, for larger square footage lots, there's a height increase. And then for both types of mixed use, a change in the FAR. In the B4, no changes to the height, no changes to the story, and just increases to the FAR. And then in B5, some increases to the height and the number of stories for larger mixed-use properties, and then for both types, an increase in the FAR. And that's Article 7. So Article 8 deals with open space for multifamily uses and mixed use. So again, this only affects the R4 through the R7 districts and the business districts. We are proposing a change to the definition of landscaped open space. You can see the underline is the new text and the strike through is the change. So what this revision is allowing is that up to 25% of the landscaped open space may include areas that are on a balcony and on a roof. So you can see currently we do allow open space on balconies to be counted, and we do allow open space on roofs to be counted. We are making a minor change to the way balconies are counted. In this section, 5321, are supplemental requirements. We are making edits to this section to be consistent with the tables in the next part of the article, which will come up here. So you can see the gist of this article is to eliminate the usable open space and increase the landscaped open space. So you can see that across the board, we're increasing the landscaped open space to 20% in the R4 through R7 districts. And then here's the B districts. Again, for mixed use only. So that reference, the 5.321, was the revision I just noted prior to scrolling through the tables. Again, it's elimination of the usable open space and increase of the landscaped open space. So here's Article 9. So in much of this article, it is a simple word change from townhouse to townhouse structure. So you'll see structure underlined in many of the tables. But what we are planning on or proposing is to increase the size of a townhouse structure to not exceed 20 feet or 200 feet or 8 townhouses in length. So that would be 8 individual townhouse units. This does not propose a change to the definition of townhouse, which is 3 or more attached townhouse units. So you can see the revision in the middle of the screen. And then, as I mentioned when I started this article, we are adding changes to the structure. Where you see revisions under the minimum lot area and the other 2 columns, that's contemplated under Article 6 and is here for consistency. So again, just adding the word structure. Again, just the word structure. And for consistency's sake, that's the revisions contemplated under Article 6. More structures. And the word structure. And then adding that into the use table structure. That doesn't change the requirement that a special permit is required in those zoning districts that are noted here. That's currently existing in our bylaw. And then here it is for the business districts. Townhouse structures are only allowed in the B2, the B3, and the B5, so we're adding that word structure. Again, in the district yard and open space requirements, adding the word structure. And here we go again. And here's the last table. And here's the word in the use table. And again, for the mixed-use districts, the planned unit development, the industrial, the transportation, and the open space. Again, we're just adding the word structure here for consistency in the description of a townhouse structure being a group of townhouse units in a single structure. And that's it.
All right, thank you. I'm going to move right into public comment this evening. Thank you to all who signed in and indicated that you'd like to speak. When I call your name, first I apologize if I butcher your name. Please come up to the podium and use the microphone if you're able. We have a microphone up here as well.
We'll switch to this
We're going to use this one.
for the
Okay.
board.
It's turned on.
Yeah, the mic is on. Oh, this one.
Yeah,
Yes, it's
people
on
can
here.
speak into that,
You just
and
need
that's
to
for
speak
us.
into it.
So, all right. So Rachel Stark, please state your name and address. Keep your comments brief and to the articles. Part of tonight's hearing.
My name is Rachel Stark. I live at 65 Randolph Street. I've lived in Arlington for 22 years. I support increased density and mixed use if it is done well. I generally support it. I support infill housing and infill building that does not include tearing down of historic structures or cutting down of mature trees. I feel like we need to stop tearing down and cutting down. I think having more affordable housing is a great idea. I'd like to hear more about it. I want to know what guarantee we have with all this, that some of the new housing will be affordable, and a little bit of detail about what that means. So can you briefly describe how that works?
Erin or Jenny, can you speak to that question?
This microphone works.
I know she's gonna get it.
They both work.
Oh, you're all set.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So in response to Rachel's comment, the affordable housing requirements of section 8.2 in the zoning bylaw will still apply. I will note that on March 25th, there is a citizen's petition to address the to propose some changes to the inclusionary zoning that the ARB will consider. But essentially, affordable units are required in developments of 6 units or more, and the contribution is 15% of the total number of units in development must be affordable.
Thank you, Erin. Pat Deal.
Good evening, I'm Pat Deal from 9 Ronald Road, Precinct 19. I served 16 years at town meeting, and I'm going back into town meeting this year, now that I have a little more time. I've lived in Arlington since I was 12 years old, and I just had a serious birthday, so it's been a long time. I thank you for the work you've done on this, and coming new to this, again, going into town meeting, my first challenge was to say, how can I get myself informed about this very serious thing? For the years that I was in town meeting, when the zoning articles would come before us, they were relatively benign. I mean, they were good, and they were correcting things, and they were fixing things, but they were kind of tinkering around the edges. I was a bit stunned to see the scale and scope of this when I started printing off the materials. And I know the work that's gone in behind this, but my biggest concern is that my fellow town meeting members, and more importantly, the residents of Arlington, have no idea that this is coming down the pike, have no idea that this is even in the works. So that's a big concern that I have about the lack of information, that we're going to be voting on something, and 2 years from now, people are going to be saying, who allowed this? Who said this was okay? Who made this right? As we see these large buildings going up on Mass Ave. So I think that town management, our selectmen, our board need to look at that and consider that. And you're going to be the ones on the line getting the phone calls when our citizens are concerned. So the most important thing, I would defer this for another year if I had the option and say, let's get the citizens informed so that they know what the actual impact on this. Second thing that concerns me, when you look at any of the zoning maps like you had there, look at R1, R2, R4, look at the economics of that. The high correlation between income in those districts and the impact that we're going to have on the higher density R districts and the business districts. This is, I think, unequally impacting our lower income citizens, current or future. Those are the people who live in those R1, 2, and 3 don't have to worry about it, including myself. But it's going to impact a lot of people in a very real way, and may not be the people showing up at meetings or showing up at town meeting. So I think that needs to be considered. I know there was a master plan. I've been trying to work my way through it, but even tangentially, looking at the master plan, these articles appear to me to be more coming from, I don't mean to be insulting, but a cookie cutter template of someone's idea of urban development that we've just kind of put in there. And I'm not sure that that fully reflects what Arlington goals and intentions are. So I think those are basically my points.
Thank you. Dawn Seltzer.
Just put on like the first slide in the first presentation.
There's some handouts for board members.
Looks like there's actually great. Here. Sorry.
funny thing happened on the way to this forum this evening. Earlier today on the Arlington list, there was a fair bit of discussion and criticism of the fact that we had not yet received the visualizations and the shadow studies that residents have been asking for. In fact, the board members have been asking for quite a few weeks. And it was quite surprising to arrive here tonight to find out that they do in fact exist. They just apparently haven't been made available to the public to see before this meeting. I had some remarks to make. I'm just going to try to cut it a little short and go right to the chase. I have both a visualization study for the board and a shadow study that I've done. The visualization study is for 127 Broadway. These are garden apartments at the corner of Broadway and River Street. They're older, modest homes, good for young families. They have nice courtyards, a lot of green space, buffers to the street, a lot of mature shaded trees. I actually grew up in a housing very much like this, and I remember as a preschooler being able to play in those courtyards safely with my friends. And for the adults, they were pretty good too, in that they could meet informally and socialize with their other neighbors. Now, this is what the Massachusetts Area Planning Council proposes that we put in that space. The buildings that you see there are all 4-story. You can ignore the shadows. They're just a careless addition by the artist, and they have no basis in reality for our latitude. To me, this looks something like a fortress. All the trees are gone, and all the usable open space has been concentrated into a single island in the middle of the parking lot. Now, I do understand that these units now are somewhat outdated and could use some modernization, but I wonder, is this really progress? Now let's look at what the effect is on the neighborhood. This is what it looks like today at the northern corner. On the right side, you have a neighborhood of Cape-style houses. On the left side are these garden apartments, which are pretty much in scale with the neighborhood. You have a nice buffer of lawn, and you have the mature trees before giving you a canopy. Let's see what our friends at MAPC have proposed instead with their build-out scenario. I think this sort of can speak for itself. We have 4-story apartment buildings there. The trees are gone, and they're crowding the sidewalk, and they're casting an afternoon shadow over the entire neighborhood. Again, I ask you, is this our idea of what progress is? Now about the subject of shadows, I'd like to direct your attention to Arlington Heights. I was there just last week, a day after the snowstorm. On the sunny side of the street, all of the walkways there were pretty well cleared, and the sunlight had melted all the ice. On the shady side of the street, well, not so great. What would this kind of upzoning development to 4 or 5 stories do to that neighborhood, to that business district? I ran the numbers, and Mass Ave there runs nearly east-west. It's only 50 feet wide. If we put up a 4-story high street wall along that southern side of the street in the business district, we would find that the effect on the shadows over the entire street would be quite dramatic. In fact, after October, the end of October, we would find that the sun would not even be high enough to clear and illuminate any of the sidewalk at midday. And for the next 3.5 months, there wouldn't be a single ray of sunshine ever striking that sidewalk on the far side. Now, if we went up to 5 stories, which the zoning changes allow, we would find that this season of darkness in the Heights would start around Columbus Day and run through March 1st of the following year. Well, this is not my idea of a friendly pedestrian atmosphere. It's not my idea of a vibrant district. It is, in fact, a dark, cold canyon, and it's just simply going to send shoppers off to the mall instead. This is not my idea of Arlington progress. Thank you.
Thank you. No applause, please. Steve Revelak.
Steve Revelak, 111 Sunnyside Avenue. As I told the board at a prior hearing, I think these are a relatively modest set of changes that affect the commercial corridors of the town, and I think they're going to be beneficial. I also think it's important to compare what we're proposing with what we currently have. So you have to realize that our 1975 rewrite of the zoning bylaw was largely a reaction to multifamily housing in general, to apartments in particular, and also to public housing. By public housing, I'm speaking specifically of Winslow Towers, which helped inspire a 2-year moratorium on the creation of construction of apartment buildings. It seems like an odd way to show caring and consideration for low-income, elderly, and disabled individuals. So our zoning rewrite was, I would term it a multi-pronged and comprehensive approach to population control. The ARB and the planning department and town meeting at the time tried to limit the population of the town by limiting the amount of housing, by severely restricting the number of new apartments that could be built, and by favoring single-family homes. As you saw from the map, most of the town is zoned in R1 and R0. So we're limiting the amount of housing supply, and for the kind that we're promoting, we're basically saying that, well, it should be the most expensive form of housing there is, which is detached single-family homes. Now, by the planning department's own build-out analysis from that year, they figured that the bylaw they passed in 1975 would reduce the maximum build-out potential of the town by some 4,800 housing units. So that's 4,800 households that will, frankly, have to live somewhere else. So I want to jump forward a little bit to a memo I sent to the ARB at the end of February, and it appeared in your board packet from February 25th. So in this memo, I took the 2018 assessors data and drew out cost distributions of different types of housing, and the cost distribution for the 19,000 and some odd housing units in the town as a whole. What's kind of interesting is if you take all of the housing in the town, from the very smallest studio apartment all the way to the biggest mansion, the median cost comes out to about $439,000 a unit. Now, single family, that's all housing types. So single family homes coming well above that, their median is about $618,000. Now, every other type of housing comes in below that median. Even the newest and most expensive apartments in town, the development at Sims, they come in at around $412,000 a piece. So we do have, housing is not getting any cheaper, and I do believe we have an affordability problem in Arlington, and it's a certain responsibility of that, or it's caused in part by our somewhat exclusionary zoning bylaw. So having done the cost analysis, I feel very comfortable saying that one of the easiest ways to address the cost of housing is to have more multifamily homes, or anything that amortizes the cost of land. Land is the driving factor of housing costs in Arlington. So I do appreciate the town's efforts to address this need. Thank you.
Thank you. Same rules apply as at town meeting. Please hold your applause. John Gersh.
So I agree with Steve. There is a housing problem in Arlington, but I see these articles as a kind of sledgehammer approach to filling that in. These are extreme changes. And I've looked at the numbers of the square foot, the setbacks, the density. It just seems extreme, and it seems quick, and using it all in the name of the master plan. I'm not sure these are the right answers. There's a building by the Stop and Shop that is what you can see as infill development. Well, that could be even taller, and those apartments are $3,000 a month. And they could put a luxury townhouse on the top of that and still not require any affordable housing. And that's a street wall, okay? And that is a favored sort of development. Arlington, a little background, is now part of the Metropolitan Mayors Coalition. There's 13 cities and 2 towns that are supposed to help meet Boston's greater housing need, and there is a need. But the fact is that Arlington is still a town, and town meeting does get a vote on these articles, and I'm glad of that. But I want to wonder if any of you town meeting members were consulted about joining this Metro Mayors Coalition, and I don't think so. And I think that the state consultants, am I correct in saying that you worked closely with state agencies like CHAPA and MAPC to develop these articles? Is that a fair statement?
Keep going. We
Well, that's a
use
question.
consultants. It's in the documents. Yes, MAPC and CHAPA were consulted. Please keep going.
All right, and well, what I think they've come up with
Not a
is
secret.
just too much, too quickly, and as a previous speaker said, not that many people know what's coming down the pike, and I think that's really true, that these things are trickling out at a very calculated rate, and I'm cynical, and I think that there's going to be a few people made very wealthy from these changes, and we're not going to have more affordable housing at the end of it, and we won't have any more land to fix the mistakes.
Thank you. Keith Shobley, I believe is the name. Enough. John Leone doesn't allow it. I'm not going to allow it.
So my name is Keith Schnebley. I live at 78 Whipcowett Road. I've lived in this town for 27 years in June. And I think one of the things that's fascinating about that is that makes me somewhere near the middle. A lot of people like to live in this town a lot for a very long time. And part of the reason for that is that it's a really nice place to live. And part of that is the open space, the amount of tree canopy that existed when I moved to this town. So sorry, I'll stop at the statement. But I think that's really interesting. People care about this town. Obviously, people have shown up here to make comment about these proposals. So people have mentioned some of the questions I wanted to ask. So part of what I wanted to ask is, well, actually one comment. One of the comments in the presentation said that buffer and open space has been depressing development in this town. And I think some people have commented on that both ways. But I think that if we take buffer and open space out of what we have as Arlington, are we changing the character of this town? Is this some place that people want to live with corridors up and down Mass Ave and Broadway that are 5 stories high, don't allow for trees to grow, don't have shade on, have nothing but shade on the street for at least half the year? That's some of my questions. So actually my main question is, has there been any kind of environmental impact done to assess the impact of these changes, these bylaw changes, to the quality of the environment in Arlington? Has there been any kind of study that shows how this will affect the protected tree definition that's also in the bylaw in this town? Just something that I would like to see addressed at some point before it goes to town meeting bill.
Typically, that sort of impact is outside of the scope of this board entirely, but we've had input from the Conservation Commission.
You gotta use a mic.
So, go ahead, sorry.
You're talking to each other.
that sort of impact is outside of the scope of zoning and isn't something that's necessarily been considered as part of these bylaws. However, environmental impact is considered as part of our environmental design review. That comes into consideration with every specific project.
So the environmental review is done at the point of the projects, and the projects are done within the confines of whatever would be the bylaws at the time. But we're assessing the bylaws right now without an environmental impact. Is that
The bylaws apply across town. The project is the project. And I don't want to get into a back and forth.
okay?
but I
I'm
think
sorry. I
that
didn't
answers
mean
your
to-
question.
I just was curious about that. Thanks.
Patricia Warden.
Patricia Warden, Precinct 8. The only kind of housing Arlington needs is affordable housing. That's not just my opinion. You will see it in the housing recommendations in the master plan, which I've handed out on page 88. That there is nothing in these amendments which requires affordable housing. Nothing. In fact, they would do the opposite. The claim that we need more diversity and so need more housing is also the opposite of what the master plan says. On page 77, you can see it on your cell phones, and I quote, Arlington is unique among Boston's inner suburbs for its diverse housing stock. There is nothing in the master plan indicating that affordable housing requires decrease in the usable open space requirements or increased density. These Redevelopment Board, Metropolitan Area Planning Council density articles are a dream for developers. If approved by town meeting, they will be a disaster for Arlington residents and businesses who are renting. 39% of dwelling units in Arlington are rentals. That is a very high number compared to other nearby towns. Our town leaders need to protect the rights and housing stability of this group, not exploit them for developers. 40% of Arlington renters pay less than $1,500 per month in Arlington's housing pool for rent. That is even less than the rent for inclusionary units, which is $1,647 a month for a two-bedroom unit. The going rent for new two-bedroom units is about $3,000. The shock for Arlington renters would be palpable, and many would have to leave or would be evicted, as is happening in Boston with its push for density and luxury units. People who can afford the rent increases people who cannot afford the rent increases are being evicted in Boston at the rate of 43 evictions per day. 2 weeks ago, Boston Globe covered this story. So ironically, many of the luxury units are unoccupied. There is no way that any inclusionary zoning or density bonus is going to accommodate the many market rate renters who are likely to be unable to afford the higher rents. The ones that come with this density gentrification. One must remember that 80% of Arlington renters are currently paying less than $1,999 per year for Arlington's very reasonable market rate rents. Raising rents for Arlington businesses is going to result in a loss of these businesses, and with them the tax revenue which they produce. Replacing them with housing is going to bring large infrastructure and school costs. The rush to fill up every available space with crammed luxury apartments, making continuous street walls of buildings that the one at 887 Massachusetts Avenue at the high school is going to remove our opportunities for attracting commercial and entrepreneurial business. The master plan also is very clear about the importance of usable open space. These redevelopment board amendments are brutal in their zero requirement for usable open space, which is the absolute opposite of many statements in the master plan. Page 34 of the master plan states, it states this statement, usable open space in the village centers is critical. This can take place on an individual lot, such as dining terraces, forecourts, etc., and collective spaces such as plazas, commons, greens, and pocket parks. These usable open spaces are a significant draw to the districts. You'll find that on page 34. When the Arlington Redevelopment Board and consultant was asked when the consultant for them was asked if the children at these new mixed-use and multifamily buildings with no open space would have to play on the sidewalks, she said no, they would play in the park. When she was asked to name a park, she said they would play on the Minuteman Bikeway. This desire for usable open space became very clear to me when attending the meetings for the master plan. I attended every single meeting. The outstanding Arlington site, which attendees frequently brought up, the Walgreens site in East Arlington, was one which residents all over Arlington had hopes for. The structures on that site were if the structures on that site were placed on the side and not in the rear, then the whole view from Mass Avenue would go to our lovely Spy Pond. What many envisioned was opening up that site, that view, with structures at the sides of the lot, including ground floor indoor and outdoor dining facilities, and some enhancing lawn and green space and trees, planters. But what the Arlington Redevelopment Board consultants here came up with for that site, if it is ever available, is zoning that brings us, you can probably find it in their build-up, that will bring us a monstrous, humongous building, maxed out in every dimension, a monster building. That's what they planned for us. It will be looming over the Massachusetts Avenue, completely blocking any view of Spy Pond for all Arlingtonians except for the occupants of the luxury units in that monster building. This is a perfect example of what the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, of what they want to bring to us. Please, don't let them do it in Arlington. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle Nathan.
Hi, I'm Michelle Nathan, 3 Robin Hood Road. And I just want to say I'm a very new resident, so I'm sure I'll get bunches of stuff wrong, but I've done my best to try to figure this out. I've been here for about 6 months. I'm just going to quickly introduce myself. While I am a new resident, I've immersed myself in learning about these zoning proposals. I've talked to small business owners, citizens, read many perspectives, including state policy, local impacts, your master plan, and your housing production plan. My intent is to understand the pros and cons and who really benefits from these zoning changes. I do support affordable housing, economic diversity, ethnic diversity, and small businesses. So I kind of have questions and comments. So the one thing I did was I took a friend of mine to Vicki Lee's in Cushing Square. I haven't been there in a couple months, well, longer than that. And I just want to say I really do support small business owners. But when I took my friend to Vicki Lee's, I couldn't wait to get out of there. I was kind of shocked at how the neighborhood looked. I felt really uncomfortable and disoriented. And unfortunately, while I love Vicki Lee's, I don't think I'll be going back. So I worry about that for Arlington. And I came from Winchester, and I don't know if Arlington does this, but it seems like with this housing production plan, I don't see a lot of citizen input. I think there were 7 citizens on the board. I don't know their backgrounds, so I worry about that low-income people and all types of people weren't on the, ongoing focus groups. And a comment or a question, if every available building gets redeveloped according to this new zoning, what are the financial implications that have been done for all residents, government services, years down the road? So what is this going to look like financially down the road? Because if there's a point to this, to me you need a financial analysis done to understand what you're going to end up with. And don't get a sense it's been done. So my question is, will we end up pushing out existing small businesses and middle-income residents and become a town of haves and have-nots, which I don't think Arlington has gotten there yet. And that's what I like about it if that's true, but I worry that that's going to happen. And a question I haven't figured out is, I don't see zoning protections proposed that prevent developers basically from tearing down more than what is currently proposed. So tearing down all available buildings, replacing with massive luxury buildings, forcing out current residents and business owners out, and decreasing the supply of existing affordable housing, and then charging higher rates and higher sale prices. And I read an article that was written by David Teasel, which holds a master's degree in city planning from MIT, and he found that was the case in Somerville. And then a big question I have is, why can't developers build more affordable housing? Because I don't hear that's talked a lot about in these proposals. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me like 1 unit for every 6 unit is pretty skimpy. So I think my quick calculation was 3,000 high-price units and 400 affordable. So to me that seems like a low ratio. And I get the sense Arlington is really interested in climate change, so why can't the buildings be net zero? Why isn't that on the proposal? And then I don't understand why the building on Mass Ave between Stop and Shop and the high school is still empty. It looks like the commercial lease is still empty. I've talked to many shop owners, and they talk about the internet. They talk about, there's no destination store. They talked about the landlords are charging too high rents. And so if you want commercial, I guess I'm kind of surprised that the new development doesn't have commercial that I see. And then I don't see open space on the top because I don't think anybody will regulate it to make sure that it's really maintained. And then I don't see spindly little trees in front of new buildings as opposed to, what you guys currently have. And then, the big question is with the financial issue. So I'll just be brave and say, after I moved in, my taxes increased by 30%. And I know the previous owners, their taxes doubled in 10 years. So in another 10 years, I'm looking at gigantic taxes, and I'm already thinking, can I afford to stay? So that's why I worry about, maybe my economics is wrong, but it seems like if you're building so many more expensive housing, then it impacts all of us in town in terms of our taxes going up, our assessments going up. And so my concern is, are we all going to be pushed out? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask future comments to keep the questions in scope to the articles that we're discussing this evening. Thank you. Barbara Thornton.
Hello, my name is Barbara Thornton. I live at 223 Park Avenue in Arlington. I've lived here for about 32 years. I was counting. Oh, sorry. Thank you. I was trying to do the math, and I have 7 points that I would like to make. I would like to make them very succinctly. Unfortunately, I wrote them down on this little piece of paper, which I cannot possibly read. So I'm just going to go by number. First of all, I want to point out that when I was born, probably the same age as many of you here, there were 1.5 billion people on the planet. There are now over 7 billion people on the planet. I'm not implying that they're all trying to move to Arlington, but many more people would like to move to Arlington than are in fact able to move to Arlington right now. Now I'm going to need this. That was number one. Number two, I applaud the process that is being used here. Master planning is to look forward, if not 70 years, at least many years forward, to see what is going to happen to the city or the town, given the trends that we are experiencing here now. What trends am I seeing? First of all, I'm seeing McMansions. I know that I will benefit if this does not pass, because when I sell my house is going to be worth a whole lot. When other people want to sell their houses even 20 years from now, those houses are going to be worth a whole lot. Why? Because they followed into the process of taking land in our R1, 2, and 3 districts and creating larger houses that will sell for, in today's dollars, $1.5 to $2 million. So my point number 3, I think I had a 2A on here, wait a minute. Sorry about this, maybe I should keep the glasses on. My point number 3 is we've spent a lot of time in talking about Arlington High School. These are our kids. My kids went there. Many of yours went there. Many of yours, thank you. It's my reminder corner up there. Many of yours went there. Our kids that went to Arlington High School or that are going to go to the next high school in Arlington are not going to be able to raise their families in this town. It's as simple as that. the price of the single-family houses in Arlington, as this gentleman said, when you lived in Arlington, you grew up in a small, single-family house that was a great starter home. There will be no starter homes in Arlington. Arlington is going to be, it's going to be like Chestnut Hill. It's going to be a network of very wealthy houses. I don't want that. I won't be around for the culmination of this master plan, but I don't want that. And I think a lot of people here would feel that the real sense of the town was lost if that happens. I'm going to go through this a little faster. Another thing that we lose by having fewer houses, fewer families, but more valuable homes, we lose the number of people that are going to walk into shops and support the Vicky Lees that we might like to cultivate here. Now up to 6, we can find our way to accommodate the problems that I've heard here tonight. I've heard a lot of the problems that we are worrying about have to do with the visual effect of the density along the spine. And we are only talking about the density along the spine. And we need to talk more fine-tuned about that. But we need to move forward and protect this town from what could happen. And we can protect it with ways of figuring out more affordable housing, of doing more trees, more setbacks, more attractive development. Let's talk about how we can make that happen, but let's not throw the whole thing out because we just don't want to address it. And as for the person who said that we're moving too fast, it hurts me because when the master plan was under development 3 years ago, 4 years ago, before your time, 5 years ago, 5 years ago, I too went to all the meetings. And at the end of all of the meetings, I wrote for the Arlington Advocate a summary of each one of the segments of the plan for all the people in Arlington to read so that they would be familiar with the issues that we are now talking about today. People, we can't wait another year until we can let everybody know. I think, Pat, could we wait? I'm sympathetic, but we got to get out there and we got to talk to people now and we got to take it as it comes and make this happen. And I am absolutely in support of the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call a 5-minute recess so people can stand up. We're about halfway through the speakers list. I now have the sign-in sheet up here. If there's anyone who hasn't signed up to speak, please come up front and do so while we're on break. We're going to come back at about 5 minutes. I'll bang the gavel. Thank you. You're next. I need to stand up.
Did you check off where we're at on this list?
Yeah.
Okay. I signed up with
We have 3 sheets.
Yeah, we've got a lot of sheets.
Hi.
I'm Beth Elliott. I'm on the sheet as a maybe, and I would like you to change me to a yes.
Okay. I was going to call you anyway. If you're a maybe,
That's what I figured.
I'm
Yeah, there's a lot of
maybes.
maybes.
I didn't know I had to put a yes down. Do I need to do?
Oh, you didn't? Yeah, then if you want to
You can put a yes down so I can.
Hi, Adam. Hi. How are you?
Not too bad. I wasn't sure if I wanted to speak. I put a question mark.
Always
Maybe
change
I
your
need
mind.
to be.
Yeah. If you're a maybe on the question list, I'll call your name and you can choose at that point.
I was going to say I was a maybe. In the interest of brevity, my point has already been made 2 or 3 times.
All right.
You can take it.
I'll take you off.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, it's right here.
Else we'll be having
We're how far along in the list? About halfway, you said?
We're about halfway through, so if you want to come on to
It's going to be a while.
You may ask an unrelated question. I got your email. Oh, good. Yeah. I didn't have a chance to look at it. That's okay. I knew. I mean, I can't talk to Doug about it yet because he was going to try to get a select board meeting. I get it. Parking. We need a parking. That would be the big area. Yeah. So when you come in with your application, you can have privileges. Show us. Parking reduction. Okay. All right. That was question. The architect said, "Did you talk to Jenny about parking?" I said, "No, I didn't." Yeah. Okay. All right. So I will let him know. Okay. Thanks.
over here? No. I can change you to a yes. Actually, you're on the first page. Oh, you're on the first page. You're not indicated that you'd like to speak, so I'll call on you.
Right here.
Right, but you didn't indicate whether you wanted to speak. So I'll add you to the list.
Of course I wanted to speak.
No? I'll get to you. I know you want to speak. I'm expecting you to stick your hand up at the end. I'll call on you shortly.
Oh, she didn't have yet either.
She had she signed it twice. She had a question on the
Okay, well, whatever. All right.
That's what happens when you stand in front. I'm sorry. That was 5 minutes. I have you want to join.
I have one on Chinese.
Do your best, I'm sure. All right. Yeah. All right, have a seat. We're going to keep moving. We're running okay, but no one wants to be here till breakfast.
Well, they do.
We didn't arrange for catering. Pam, go ahead.
Okay, I'm Pam Hallett. I'm Executive Director of the Housing Corporation of Arlington. I live at 1 Gilboa Road. I'm also a town meeting member. My grandparents bought a house here in 1929. My parents moved down into that house in 1980. And I came back from Chicago after 35 years, and I've been here for 9 years. So long, long roots here in Arlington. Arlington has changed dramatically. It used to be a great blue-collar town that used public transportation. Nobody had cars, and everybody helped each other out. They were all part of a community. They knew their neighbors. They knew what was going on in town. This has changed. I'm here trying to do affordable housing, and I get grief in the Heights. I get no support in other parts of the town. East Arlington, which is probably the densest and newest part of town, I'm incredibly welcomed in to the community, which I find truly shocking, and I think people have to start paying attention to what's going on around them. We have a great building going up at 117 Broadway in the Commonwealth. After many years of convincing them that scattered site is the way to go, not one big building with 97 units in it, they finally came ahead, like a week and a half ago, funded our 48-unit project, which is 3 separate buildings on 2 different sites, one in the Heights, one in East Arlington. We're very excited about getting started. We'll be breaking ground, we hope, this summer. And having new tenants being able to move in less than 2 years. So we're very excited. We're glad to be bringing about $24 million in development to Arlington. So that's great. There'll be lots of people working here all the time, spending money, buying things for food, buying dinner, going home, hanging out, realizing what kind of wonderful restaurants we have here and small businesses that we really ought to be staying here in town and supporting. And that's what we're trying to do, is build enough density of affordable housing to be able to support the commercial and business community, which is here and is trying to survive. But as we all know, businesses come and go here because they don't have the support that they need. And so I think it's time for you all to take a real deep look inside and say, what am I trying to do here? Is it just all about me and what my house is going to be worth so I can sell it and retire someplace else? Or is it really about building community and having truly diverse people, children, communities, businesses, and make it someplace that's really wonderful to live? Thank you, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. John Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Worden, Precinct 8. I've lived here for over 50 years. Some people were mentioning how long they've been around, so I think I've been around as long as anybody, maybe more so. Back in 1970, I stood before the planning board, which was predecessor of the redevelopment board, and urged them to reject a plan brought to us by the Mugar family. And the Mugar family wanted to build 3 high-rise towers on the swamp in East Arlington. That was before we had wetlands. There used to be swamps. Anyway, they wanted to build these 3 high-rise towers and cause all kinds of traffic and everything. And the people in East Arlington, particularly people were very upset about that. And I stood with those friends from that part of town because I believe, as I still do, that we are one town. And if you attack East Arlington, you attack me, you attack Morningside, you attack the Heights. And so a few years later, and by the way, I should say that the 1975 zoning bylaw, and I was there, I worked with the redevelopment board members to formulate that document. It was not perfect, but it was, unlike the revisionist history that Mr. Revelak has picked up, that's actually not true, because one of the elements of that was to have a high-rise district of 13 stories, same height as Winslow Towers. In Mill Street, a developer came in with a high-rise building, and the redevelopment board heard that permit and voted it on the night of the Great Blizzard. They had a public attendance of 1. It was me. I urged them not to do it. I said the weather might be a little bit of a deterrent to public participation, but they went right ahead. And they voted it, and then actually a citizens group sued the redevelopment board. Later the appeals board turned it down because they needed an opinion from them. And eventually what resulted was the 5-story building that's there, because town meeting had the good sense to lower that R7 zone from 13 stories to 5. And in 1979, no, wait a minute, I'm sorry. Let me move ahead to 2018. Another M came along to assault Arlington. That was the MAAPC. And they brought to you the plans, the articles, the build-outs, whatever, that you now have before you, or that town meeting will soon have before it, which the redevelopment board must now consider. And this, in a way, it affects most directly, or can affect most directly, and Article 6 is the worst of these, by the way. It affects people on Mass Avenue, obviously, the people who are nearby Mass Avenue, people nearby Summer Street, Mystic Street, even Pleasant Street. Or most of Pleasant Street will be protected by the historic district. But in a wider sense, it affects us all, because Mass Avenue is our main street. You can't get hardly from one part of the town to the other without traversing Mass Avenue. If you want to go to one of these restaurants that the previous speaker mentioned, or the veterinary office, or the dry cleaners, or the shops, or whatever, you've got to go on Mass Avenue. And the idea that would be the heights which a previous speaker mentioned, and the type of building that is possible with no setbacks, no rear yards. I mean, there are rear yards small, no side yards. If you want, they talk about the street wall, and I know the planning department has walked away from the street wall language, but imagine the whole avenue paved, lined with buildings of the type that Mr. Connie built next to the high school, but maybe higher. Is that the kind of Mass Avenue that we will feel comfortable with? I don't think so. The Boston, not the Boston Globe, they never heard of Arlington except to show a picture of an alleged former massage parlor. It was on the front cover the other day. But no, I'm thinking of our own favorite newspaper that unfortunately nobody reads anymore, the Arlington Advocate. But they were reporting on an article in Boston Magazine. And Boston Magazine said that Arlington is one of the best towns in the area to live in. And that is a high level of praise, and I think we should keep it that way. So I appeal to the board as the initial gatekeepers of these articles, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and particularly 6, to be the gatekeepers and say, no, this is not appropriate, this is too quick, it's too soon, it's too high, it's too wide, it does all the things that detract from the nature of this town that we love so much. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Elise Salinger.
Hi everyone, my name is Elise Salinger. I'm on the Housing Plan Implementation Committee. I live in Precinct 4, and I'm really happy to be here today. I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I think it's a really important conversation. So I come at this personally and professionally. Personally, I just moved to the town, and I actually found it to be a really welcoming place. So it's been interesting for me to be in this room and feel like, oh, maybe my lack of car ownership and modest income aren't welcome here if there isn't room being made for me as a young professional to stay in this town. So I'm a little disheartened, to be perfectly honest, after sitting through all of this and all of your comments. But moving on from that, because I also want to tell you a little bit about what I think professionally is. So professionally, I'm an affordable housing developer. I build affordable senior housing for a company called Two Life Communities. We're doing a lot of great work in the greater Boston area. And I think that density creates so many amazing opportunities for diverse housing types, for diverse populations. We really want to center equity in all that we do. I think as citizens here in the town of Arlington, I know that I certainly do in my work and my personal life. So I just think that if we can really stop and think about who we're being welcoming to, who's already here, how can we identify the assets that we have available to us and how can we capitalize them? There's a lot there. And I think that this plan can be really positive because it is targeted. It really focuses on Mass Ave, majority of what we're talking about tonight. I'm really thrilled as a carless owner that the select board just passed the select bus, or sorry, it's not called select bus service, it's called express bus service along Mass Ave. I will be using it daily. I think it's an amazing transit corridor. I also walk for all of my retail shopping purposes, and I think that the more people like me that we can bring to Mass Ave, I live in East Arlington, the better the businesses will do, the better for economic development. Retail, as we say, is the frailest flower in the garden of different asset types, and so you really need a lot of housing, people, vibrancy to keep our amazing businesses afloat. I love living in East Arlington. I think it's an amazing place, and I'd love to see those businesses grow and thrive. So I am definitely a yes on this plan. I think that this is the first step in a multi-month, hopefully multi-year conversation. I know that CHAPA has been engaged, and it's just the beginning of the facilitation and the work that they're going to do to build a robust conversation in the advocate and over the dinner table. And I also think that there's a lot more to come when it comes to affordable housing. Really what we're talking about tonight is density and zoning, and that's sort of part one. You have to start there. And then what I hope to see in future town meetings and future conversations is a really robust conversation about the inclusionary zoning articles and policies. So I think that's to come, and we have to take this first step to get to those next conversations. So thank you.
Thank you. The next name on the list, I apologize, I can't read your handwriting. Your address is 20 Orchard Place. Oh, Winnell.
I can't read. Mrs. Boyd in the 4th grade. Oh my
Yeah.
God, she would be turning over in her.
She needs a ruler.
Yep. Thank you.
Maybe I need a ruler.
Yes, Winnell Evans, Orchard Place. Speaking to Elise, to Barbara, to Pam, to Steve, nobody in this room has said that they do not want affordable housing in Arlington. And I have not heard a subtext in any comments that says we want to keep people out of Arlington. That is so not the point of the resistance that some people have expressed to these plans. But the issue that I have is that these proposed amendments do nothing to encourage affordability. What they do is make it possible for developers to put up many units on much smaller lots than were previously required. And there is no incentive for them to provide affordable units. And I say this with no disrespect to the builders in the room. You are in the business to make a profit. I understand that. You're going to build the best, highest cost units that you possibly can. But there's nothing that's going to increase affordability. I'm also extremely concerned about the displacement that is going to take place as redevelopment begins, because most of the affected districts are full of renters and small businesses, and they're going to lose their leases, and they're going to be forced out, and they are not going to be able to afford the much higher rents that will be in place once these new buildings go up. I am so happy to see the 100% affordable buildings that our housing corporation is building. This is the kind of development that I would like to see in Arlington. And when we saw the numbers about the current units and the proposed increase in units, we're looking at about 3,000 more market rate units and about 500 affordable units. If we could flip those numbers, I bet there would be a lot more people who would be on board with this. And my one last comment is, one thing I'm also really opposed to is allowing landscape space to move to roof and balconies. This is a kind of Blade Runner-ish image of amenities for those who can afford to enjoy them, and it takes it off the street level and away from everybody else who walks by. So those are my comments. I do very much appreciate the work that the Department of Planning and Community Development and the ARB have put into this. This is a long-running, complex, and really, really difficult issue. But we've got to address affordability in concrete amendment language. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Winnell.
Tell me your name again.
Winnell Evans.
Peter Bloom.
I'm here, I'm not sure what I can say.
Okay, all right. Let's see. Joanne Preston.
Good evening. I'm sorry I have laryngitis. Joanne Preston. I live at 42 Mystic Lake Drive, town meeting member, precinct 9. I've just come from another meeting over in the library. It was a meeting of tenants for a livable Arlington. They were all discussing their rent increases.
these are the people I feel who are most vulnerable to this plan. They live on those, what look on your map like these very small strips along Mass Ave and Broadway, in these brick apartment buildings that are set back with a nice lawn. And they have they're basically moderate income tenants. These are just the buildings that will be, with this rezoning, that will be most likely torn down, and they will build luxury apartments. I know that because I just read a piece from the Harvard Joint Center, which said that basically building now, builders of apartments are building luxury apartments. That's where the money is, and that's where the demand is. So these Arlington residents will be displaced. Where will they live? Even if they happen to qualify to be affordable, and those are the rents that have just gone up $300, they cannot, they'll have to get back on the waiting list. So when we talk about we're trying to keep people out of Arlington, I'd like to keep these people in Arlington. They're hardworking people who contribute to their community. They've been here many, many years. They have support systems within the community. And I can't see how they will be able to stay here if this goes through. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan Stamps.
Thanks a lot. I'm Susan Stamps. I live on Grafton Street, and I'm a town meeting member and a member of the tree committee, although I'm not representing the tree committee, although I think most of the committee's here. The work of the redevelopment board and the planning department is so appreciated by those of us who are very involved in town government, whether it's town meeting members, sitting on other boards and such like that. So I think there is I know that I have mixed feelings about coming up here and saying there are things I don't like about these ideas. I don't want you to take it the wrong way, but that we don't appreciate it. I think maybe there could be some tweaks, but just to get to the point, I think there were two major points. One was, and this has already been made by previous speakers, that I think the town is very, very supportive of Pam Hallett and Housing Corporation of Arlington, the Arlington Housing Authority, etc. And we would like to see a lot more affordable housing in town. And I think there's a way to do affordable housing where you can get the deed restrictions up to a fairly high number, like what's the highest, 50% of area median income. A lot of people, probably many people in this room could qualify for certain kinds of deed restricted affordable housing. I think that's what we should be focusing on. I agree with the prior speakers that there's nothing in these zoning bylaws that does anything except for allow developers to charge more for really small units, which is what my kids in New York City ran into that, and so they had to move to the suburbs. And kids in Boston are running into that too. I get that, but I don't think that this is the answer. The other, maybe if there was some restrictive language in the bylaws, if they were tweaked in that way. I don't know if there's time to do that before town meeting. I would suggest that we discuss this over the next year and bring it up for 2020 town meeting. My other concern is about the loss of open space, and I just wanted to, this is all, it all. Okay.
Don't worry.
Sorry, I need a table. The basis of these zoning changes are the master plan that town meeting approved in 2015. And it has a very stirring list of town goals. And My favorite is Article 4, the environment. We value the physical beauty and natural habitats of our town, parks, ponds, and wetlands, dramatic vistas, and tree-lined streets, as they contribute to the well-being of our community. Recognizing the fragility of our natural resources. Now listen to this. Recognizing the fragility of our natural resources, we must ensure that Arlington's residential areas, commercial centers, and infrastructure are developed in harmony with environmental concerns. We will be known for our commitment to the preservation of Arlington's beauty, limited open space and resources, as well as our place in the regional and global community. For anybody who's walked down Mass Ave from between the center and the Heights in the summertime, you know that it's really not very pleasant. It's a total heat island all the way down. There aren't any trees. Why are we building tall buildings that are going to further take away any chance for having trees or green space on the sidewalks or next to the sidewalks? And further, the zoning changes want to even reduce the open space around the buildings dramatically by like 75%. And to me, I mean, this town loves our trees and our green spaces. It just seems like the wrong way to go. If you look at the master plan as a comprehensive list of things we want to do, I think it's a mistake to just focus on one area and ignore the rest. And to just focus on housing and ignore the environment, I think is a mistake. I mean, what's next? Are we going to start tearing down historic houses because that'd be a good place to put affordable, multifamily housing or that sort of thing? And I just ask the town to look at the master plan as a whole and try to be consistent with that. And I really do appreciate the work you put into this. Thank you.
Thank you. No applause. It has the potential to influence people's votes, so I ask that you keep your applause to yourselves. Kate Casa.
Hi, I'm Kate Casa, and I live at 62 Wollaston Avenue, and I've lived here for about almost 22 years now, and I grew up locally. I just want to say that I'm in support of these proposed zoning amendments. In my opinion, I think they'll provide a modest increase in density in the selected commercial corridors along Broadway and Mass Ave, and I see that as a good thing, economically and socially. The changes will bring more housing choice and opportunities to Arlington, and including some affordable housing. They will also help to modernize commercial spaces, potentially attracting new businesses to town. These changes are not required. Property owners will have an opportunity to make some changes on their property gradually if they sell or they choose to redevelop. With the mansions going up everywhere around town, the zoning amendments, I think, as proposed, will increase options for people who want to stay in town, who are looking to downsize. I think it could attract and keep more young families and single people to our community, and increasing diversity. Many households are looking for a home that's near public transportation and vibrant commercial areas. Increased mixed-use developments support and revitalize, I think, our commercial businesses. So I think that if we can increase density in the commercial areas as proposed, it will support our small businesses and help keep them vibrant. Arlington is not going to stay the same. With Amazon, Uber, traffic woes, and the cost of housing, this is all impacting our local community, the way people want to live and the way people want to work. I think the proposed zoning changes can and will help our community respond in a positive way, productively, to these changes that are coming. Help support what we know people are looking for, which is sustainable housing near public transportation and vibrant community centers. So I'm in support, and I just want to say, aside, it's really refreshing to me to hear so much support for affordable housing. I'm in the field, and I'm a longtime supporter of that, not just because it's my business, really, but because it's my heart. It is what brought me to Arlington, was the diversity in income, and that we had a lot of different kinds of people doing a lot of different kinds of work, and was very, I like that, and I think it's what makes a vibrant community, and I see these changes as an opportunity to build on that, and I do want to thank the town for all the effort that's gone into this. I was also on the housing production committee too, so people know that. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Fiore. Okay. Beth Elliott.
My name is Beth Elliott. I live at 98 Highland. I would also like to speak in support of the proposed changes. Hearing the language of this is an attack or this is an assault is really upsetting to me. This is not an attack or an assault on this town or its character. It's an invitation to open a conversation that will hopefully broaden out the community of people who can benefit from this town that you all have built. I think it's also important to note that many of these changes will largely bring they largely conform with existing uses. So many of the uses on the Mass Ave corridor right now could not be built under the current zoning code. They could be built under these amendments. That's, I think, what was referred to as kind of bringing the zoning bylaw in conformity with the existing uses. So to think about existing uses, if that's what you want to preserve, that's what this will allow to be built. I also think, increasing density. I also am cheered by the support for affordable housing, and more units being built, more density is really the only way to meaningfully move the needle on affordability. It costs a ton of money to build affordable housing because it costs a ton of money to do housing development. Land is expensive, construction is expensive, labor is expensive. When I heard that AHC was doing a proposed multi-development affordable for $24 million, I mean, that's cheap at $24 million. So if you talk about wanting a lot of 100% affordable, you have to think about, well, how is that going to get paid for? Does the town have that kind of money? So I spent 10 years working in a state government agency that funds affordable housing. I can tell you the state doesn't have that money. Also interesting to think about changes that would want to up the percentage of affordable units. So requiring units that are built because of these changes to have greater affordability. I've heard that kicked around. And I think one of the things that's difficult is you have to think about the economics of these developments. And developers have to borrow the money to build these buildings. They got a mortgage just like the homeowners in this room, and they have to pay it back. And the income produced by the affordable units is not enough to cover the cost of building those units in our town, basically in Metro Boston. So you need the market units to cross-subsidize the affordable units. That's the only way you're going to meaningfully move the dial on getting more affordable units into Arlington. I'd also just like to, it always amuses me when people at these meetings talk about that horrible building by the Stop and Shop. Everyone hates that building by the Stop and Shop. And I walk my dog past that building pretty much every day, and it's not my favorite. But guess what? That was built under existing zoning laws. These changes didn't produce that building. You can get that result that you hate just as much today as you could potentially under the new changes. So I think it's worth thinking about, what do we stand to gain instead of focusing so much on what you think you might lose? Thank you.
Thank you. Aja Kepka.
Hello, my name is Asha Kepka and I live in East Arlington, 17 Soul Street. I actually came to Arlington 20 years ago. I didn't inherit my house and I was immigrant. I only had $100 in my pocket when I arrived in America. So I worked really hard and I was able to buy a 2-family home, which I struggled for many, many years to keep. It's not the greatest neighborhood, but I love it. It's full of great neighbors, people from different countries, different races. I don't have parks around me. I have a building right next to me. I can show you what it's like to live next to 25 feet tall building. I barely get any light. There's very little space between us. The owner of the building cannot even access the building without going to my yard. When they painted the building, which started cheap right away, they had to trash my garden. They had to, the paint was everywhere. Not only I don't get light, I get trash. I get noise. I get paint now spreading for like years now. Right now my tenants are moving. They're a young couple in their 20s. They want to start a family and they have great jobs, but I can't afford to live in Arlington. And as a landlord, I was always hesitant to raise the rent because I remember what it was like to eat ramen noodles every day in order to pay my bills. These kids are making good money, but they can't afford to stay in Arlington. They're moving out of state. The apartment, the house next to me, half of it sold for $860,000. I am not against affordable housing. Nobody here is. I think we all, come from different walks of life. Some of us even more maybe exotic. We haven't heard the examples of towns where increased development actually created more affordable housing and lowered the prices. Has anybody can give me an example? We haven't heard that. And I've noticed, in 20 years, the prices in Arlington have been going up. I also have friends in Somerville where there was increased development, and the prices have not gone up. People have been driven out of Somerville, out of Cambridge, unless they, they live in a house they inherited. But working class people cannot start their lives from scratch like I did, and I felt very fortunate. And I will always pay towards my community. And I feel like, I trust that you will try to preserve the community and, paving our city and masking progress, something as progress, which is only paving, building fast, cheap, and out of control, will not create vibrant community. We just have to think about this as a larger picture of, environment, transportation, housing, and opportunities for many people. Thank you.
Thank you. Deanne DuPont. Oh, sorry, you were a no. No? Jonathan Nyberg? He left. Aram Hallman.
Hello, my name is Alan Holman. I live at 12 Winmore Street. I have been a resident of Arlington for 21 years, since 1998. I served 6 years in town meeting, although I'm no longer a town meeting member. I want to thank the board for listening. When I made comments like this in Cambridge, where I used to live, when they got bored with the public speakers, they'd go out for sandwiches, always coming back to hear the developers' lawyers. So be it for the lack of sandwiches or because you're really concerned, I want to thank you for listening. I note that the proposed rezoning is also occurring as we debate funding for a high school so costly that it's significantly...
Out of scope, we're not going to talk about the high school tonight. It has nothing to do with the zoning bylaws. Please stay on scope with the articles in question, sir.
Okay.
I apologize for interrupting, but we're going to stay on topic.
May I mention affordable housing?
You may.
Thank you. Affordable housing is not the primary purpose of these amendments. It's to increase the town's revenues by increasing density, population, and real estate taxes paid. So we should be careful about saying that this is all about affordable housing. It's not. The town is between a rock and a hard place in that operating costs continue to rise at beyond 2.5% a year, while residents' incomes do not. I'm not going to address the details of the various proposals, the decreases in setbacks and density and height and all that. I want to deal with this from more the 1,000-foot level. And the problem is that these proposals will not solve Arlington's problems. It may mitigate them, but only slightly, and certainly not enough to justify them. You cannot build your way out of our fiscal bind, our housing shortage in general, or our affordable housing shortage. You simply cannot do that. The fiscal bind has not changed since I moved here 21 years ago, which is that town costs continue to rise at a rate faster than people's incomes. As a result, that means that renters and those on fixed or limited incomes are eventually forced out. They can't afford to live here anymore. That's perfectly legal, and that may be all that the board is concerned about. However, it is certainly not ethical, nor is it consistent with our master plan, which espouses our welcome to everyone, not only people of different races, but also of people of different economic circumstances. The record we've had so far has not been very good. In the 21 years I've lived here, Arlington has built about 1,000 housing units total, bringing the total up from, I forget whether it's 19,000 to 20 or 20,000 to 21, but not much. 400 of those 1,000 units built in that time period come from 3 developments: the Myrack, Sims, and Brigham Square. In those 3 are 400 of the 1,000 units of housing that have been built in Arlington over 21 years. And of those 1,000 units, of those 400, built in those 3 developments, only 44 of them have been affordable. So large projects like this are not going to get our way out of the affordable housing problem, and we should not count on them doing that. By the way, those 44 units were built in only 2 of those projects. None were built in Myrack, because at that time, when I asked the Arlington Redevelopment Board, prior to our having an inclusionary zoning ordinance, at that time, when I asked the Arlington Redevelopment Board to at least ask the Myrack family to include some affordable housing units in their 135-unit development, the Redevelopment Board refused to even ask Myrack, despite the many concessions that they made. So again, building more is not going to solve affordable housing problem. I want to wrap up. I don't want to take too much time. I'd like to make some suggestions, because I have heard much opposition to this, and I also oppose them, but I haven't heard suggestions about what we should do instead. Let me know if I go off topic, please. A couple of things. First, we live here, the responsibility is ours. Let me suggest the following: a 1% real estate transfer tax due by the seller at the time of sale, with the money to go towards affordable housing. That's the kind of money which will significantly add up. Figure at $500,000 a house, 1% is $5,000. You can do the math and figure out how many it costs to build 1 unit. The other thing is that although normally positions in the town with technical expertise are usually appointed by the town manager. I guess I'd like to suggest that Arlington change things to elect rather than have the town manager appoint members of the redevelopment board. Redevelopment boards fairly consistently side more with developers than
It's out of
residents.
scope, sir. That issue is the Board of Select Board matter.
Okay.
I was heard that this evening.
That's fine. Finally, if you want to view a canyonized main drag, I suggest you take a look at either portions of Mass Ave in Cambridge or Cambridge Park Drive at Alewife. You can see what the future might be. I think I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Karen Kelleher.
Good evening, Karen Kelleher. I live in Precinct 5. I am a town meeting member and a member of the Housing Plan and Implementation Committee. I rise in support of these articles. I want to thank the Community Development Department and the Redevelopment Board for their work on this, like everyone else has. I believe that these changes, contrary to some of the speakers before me, will not destroy the character of our community, but actually kind of double down on some of the things that we like best about our community. The density along Mass Ave, the shops, the diversity of uses, the restaurants, that's density. It's a dense, walkable urban environment with residential very nearby, access to public transit, and if you watch development patterns, this is what's most desirable in our market right now. A lot of the prior speakers have commented that building more housing won't solve our problem. It's true, every solution is going to be incremental. But that density will bring a lot more vibrancy to those districts. It'll help support that retail that we all like, which we all know struggles so much. And it will create mixed income housing. And it's true, prior speakers have talked about the cost of building affordable housing. The property that the Housing Corporation of Arlington is building, it requires a lot of public subsidy. And there's just a limit to how much of the state subsidy that this town is going to be able to garner in any period of time. So if you're concerned that the numbers of affordable units we can build over time is small, one strategy for ensuring it's small is to just rely on that state subsidy. Inclusionary zoning ordinance essentially takes the market value that's grown, and we're part of a larger housing market. The cost of housing here is a function of the greater Boston market and the growth in that market, and the fact that we have a desirable location with a number of these other desirable qualities, one of which is the walkability and the access to public transit and the retail and the restaurants, and that's desirable to both the millennials and the families that are raising children, and I've lived here for 13 years I guess, and it's created a really nice lifestyle. I live in East Arlington, I can walk to the center, my kid can walk to school and has for 8 or 9 years. I want to just mention that I think that the aesthetic issues that are being brought up today are really important issues for us to have a conversation about. I do think they matter, but we have to consider the trade-offs, right? Having setbacks and unit size requirements, all the dimensional requirements of our zoning code do limit the amount of housing that can be built. As a result, it limits the amount of affordable units you can get with your inclusionary zoning requirement. There are trade-offs, and we should think about the impact. We don't want to create a canyonized Mass Ave. I'm not sure I would have the same reaction to Mass Ave in Cambridge. I think it's a very, very vibrant, walkable urban district, but there's a character to that district that's a little different maybe from ours. But this isn't that radically different. We have lots of mixed, multifamily housing along Mass Ave in very large buildings, many of them 4 or 5 stories high. They may have more setbacks, and we should consider those issues, but let's talk about how we can mitigate those issues and what are the trade-offs, and what's your proposal for how we could maybe tweak the proposals rather than let's wait 2 years. This will not get fixed in 2 years. Our market will just continue to get more expensive. So I support the articles, and I appreciate the very civil and thoughtful discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Carl Wagner.
Thank you. My name is Carl Wagner. I live on Edge Hill Road, and I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 11. That's better. It feels like it's a game show this way.
Tell me your name again.
Carl Wagner, Precinct 11, Edge Hill Road. I am very concerned about these articles, and I hope people here will also let other people know about next Monday and the following Monday's articles. The general intent appears to have been to follow along with, I guess, what they think is the master plan, but in actual fact, the master plan does not specify what's being done. And I've heard people like Bob Tosi Jr. saying that what needs to be done when we make changes to zoning is to do an involvement of the community, a grassroots, a citizen, a resident, a renter, a business owner, a business renter involved set of changes. And these changes weren't like that at all. I was lucky enough that somebody let me know about a December 13th meeting, I think it was, of CHAPA and some sort of outreach to people very interested in affordability. So I went to it, but as far as I know, other than that, it's been very, very limited involvement from down below. And so I think these things, whatever they are, should be put off until future times when citizens and these other groups I mentioned that actually pay the taxes here are able to come back and be informed and be an actual stakeholder in the process of designing the articles, not in sitting here and having to ask these good men and women to not go forward with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Loretti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Loretti, 56 Adams Street. I too am concerned about the consistency of these articles with the master plan, and I'd like to go through them one by one. Article 6 relates to residential districts. Here's what the master plan says. Standards that affect intensity of use, such as maximum floor area ratio, lot coverage, maximum percent setbacks, open space ratios, and minimum lot area / per dwelling unit seem reasonable and consistent with prevailing development patterns in the neighborhood. One exception is townhouses, and yet the changes that we're seeing go well beyond townhouses into other types of other types of uses. They extend well beyond the townhouse district to the R5 through R7 zones. And I did a search of the master plan. I couldn't find that R5 through R7 are mentioned at all as needing changes in their dimensional requirements. So that's just for Article 6. When we get to Article 7, one of my main concerns is about the B1 zoning district. And here's what the master plan says. Amend the zoning bylaw to enhance flexibility in business districts to promote the development of higher value mixed-use properties. The B1 district helps to preserve small-scale businesses in or near residential areas, but changes in other business districts should be considered. So by implication, it's saying that the B1 district is going to stay as it is. And indeed, the zoning bylaw describes the B1 district as the predominant use includes 1- and 2-family dwellings, houses with offices on the ground floor, or office structures which are in keeping with the scale of adjacent houses. And then what do we see in this proposed bylaw change is in the B1 district for mixed use, 0 side yard setbacks, a 45-foot maximum height instead of 35 feet, 4 stories instead of 3, and then the floor area ratio actually doubled from 0.75 to 1.5. Well, that's really not in keeping with the residential districts or nearby residential structures that this master plan suggests needs to occur. Another aspect of this particular article is also covered in the master plan, which says the floor area ratio of 1 to 1.4 is reasonable and can be adjusted with a special permit, yet we see the floor area ratios being adjusted up to as high as 2.2. The other thing that's happening in that article is the elimination of the distinction between small and large lots for developments in the B3 and B5 zoning districts with respect to the maximum height in stories. I didn't see anything in the master plan that addressed that. So I'm not quite sure why that change is being made. Then under Article 8, and this is what it says referring specifically to business districts, Arlington's open space requirements, percentage of total gross floor area seem reasonable. Usable open space in the village centers is critical. These usable open spaces are a significant draw to the districts. And then what we have is a bylaw that completely eliminates the requirement for usable open space. It does increase the landscaped open space, but allows a quarter of that to be on the roof. And I would emphasize that most of the open space in Arlington is not in what we typically think of as open space. It's not in the open space zoning district. It's on all the lots that are largely built out as it is. And I did a quick calculation. If you reduce the open space on all of the developed lots in town by 10%, you would be reducing the total open space in the town by more than the total amount of open space currently in the open space district. And in a lot of cases, what's being proposed for those affected districts is actually more than a 10% reduction. So I think that is all I had to say. But I do think that the usable open space requirement is really needs to be withdrawn and consistent with the recommendations of the master plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve McKenna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for staying up, everybody. Steve McKenna, Precinct 13. I think that one of the most important things to say right up front is the appreciation for everybody that has come here to voice whatever opinion you have. John Warden mentioned a while ago that it's for the love of the town, and that's why everybody's here. No matter what side of the debate you may be on, but it is pure and simple that everybody's here for one reason only, and I think that's a value asset that the town has to appreciate. I do have a couple of comments before I read my statement. Unlike other speakers, I have to write ahead of time. There's been a lot of discussions about the developers, and this is all for the developers and so forth. And if we do not allow these zoning changes, it is going to hurt one major developer in town. A developer that has developed more properties and will continue to develop more properties in the next few years than any other developer, and that's Pam Hallett's organization. Take a look and see what she's been doing over these years. And to the point where whether a developer builds 6 units and only 1 unit is provided to affordable housing, you're providing housing to one family that may never live in a safe home. So what's wrong with providing housing for one person if that's what the zoning bylaws allow? And the inclusionary zoning allows that. So we shouldn't forget that. These are not numbers. These are families that we're talking about. So whether the developer is building 30 units or Pam is building, these are providing housing for people that need housing. That's throughout the state right now, not just in Arlington. A couple of things with regard to the proposed zoning bylaws. It creates newer business opportunities for people to come into town. It also creates growth for existing businesses. And I'll talk about that in a moment. It creates much needed housing stock, and that's one of the major reasons why housing is so expensive everywhere, not just in Arlington. It creates newer housing stock that's built to today's standards, providing safer and more modern housing. It creates much more income for the town that, as we've heard in the past, is needed as well. These proposed zoning changes are critical to the revitalization of Arlington, as well as the continued economic growth and prosperity of our town. It will provide sensitive development opportunities for older, functionally obsolete properties along our main corridors, allowing them to become more relevant in meeting the demands of our local businesses, as well as the lifestyle needs of the citizens in Arlington. Most of the properties along Mass Ave and Broadway were built prior to 1930, and it's time to rejuvenate these properties, and the proposed zoning bylaws will allow that to happen. Much of our retail and mixed-use properties are so much smaller and older than what businesses want right now that a lot of our businesses are not thriving. If you look at much of our vacant storefronts throughout the community, these are smaller stores that are less than 700 or 800 square feet. Most businesses need more space than that be able to have inventory, to grow their business and bring people in. And we need to give these property owners an opportunity to create their property, develop it, and give an opportunity to bring new businesses into town. By allowing the zoning changes, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead here. Arlington only needs to look to our neighbors in Lexington, when years ago they realized the need for new and functional mixed-use development. Lexington Center has not lost its character or its sense of history, and the businesses are thriving. Long-term residents moved out of their larger homes and into residential housing right into Lexington Center, supporting local businesses and the community. Belmont, as was mentioned earlier, is in the midst of many new development opportunities, creating more housing, retail and office space, meeting the demands of the community. By allowing new zoning changes, Lexington and Belmont created much needed tax income to support town services. Arlington needs to vote and approve these zoning changes so we can stay competitive and relevant in order to sustain our long-term viability. Approving these zoning changes will provide more housing for our aging population and generate much needed housing for multiple types of households that will not overburden our schools. It will also provide more affordable housing as required as zoning bylaws. And there is one person here that has spoken against the opportunity of providing more affordable housing. And you need to think of what impact changing the zoning bylaws will do for us and for this economy and for these affordable housing. Finally, these proposed zoning changes are not random acts to destroy the fiber of our town. They are well thought out, specific, and reasonable plans as researched and determined by our planning department to better the community. These proposed zoning changes will not create a wall of darkness as some have described. This is not going to become New York City. We're not building 8 or 10-story units high. We're not competing with Cambridge. We're talking about 4 or 5 stories on select sites. I implore you to look at the site plan that's been provided, talk to your planning department. We're not building every single vacant lot or tearing down every single property along Mass Avenue. They're talking about a sensitive way to control building and create an opportunity for housing. Lost my spot there. The proposed zoning changes will not create a wall of darkness. As I said, they are sensitive to its neighbors and neighborhoods. Each development opportunity will require a hearing and will need to meet all the specific requirements and will require approval from the ARB. And everybody, I hope, understands that each developer is going through an arduous project, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars by the time they get approval before they go in front of this board to make sure they get approved. Years ago, when developers come into Arlington, they had a rule of thumb. They came into Arlington once, and then they left because it was so difficult to build here. And that's why we have so much difficult times here in Arlington, trying to build good quality product. Finally, Arlington is surrounded by major universities, hospitals, high-tech and biotech industries. We are located in the hub of an area full of growth and prosperity, and we are surrounded by towns that have recognized it and have made similar changes to strengthen and better their communities. For years I had a radio show, folks, and think of it. Harvard University is not going anywhere. MIT, BC, Mass General Hospital, high-tech, biotech. We're in the center of all of this, and that's not going to change. And there's no way that we can put border walls around us and say, you can't come in because you're creating more expensive housing for us. And the final thing I have to say is the Arlington Planning Department knows the importance of these changes, and they have spent countless hours researching and determining how critical the revitalization of our main corridors are to Arlington's future. The Planning Department is filled with dedicated people serving our community. They are highly educated and trained professionals with degrees in planning and urban development, and I think it's time we trust them and let them do their jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we've reached the end of our speakers list. So the board will still accept. Mr. Oster?
I'm Adam Oster. I live in East Arlington in Precinct 3. I'll try to be really brief. There's really only 2 things that I wanted to say, besides thank you for all this work. This is an appropriately ambitious, but very ambitious bundle of stuff to get through town meeting. And as a town meeting member, I guess I wanted to, excuse me? I'm sorry, I'm not used to this. As a town meeting member, I wanted to just give you some feedback about what we might need to feel comfortable making a decision like this. And because the recodification is great, but it's still not self-documenting. And when you come up here and talk about the floor to area ratio, we don't know what that means. So I hope that when you come to town meeting, you'll be prepared to explain it to us. That zoning map that was up there for 3 seconds, I think you should print it out in color and give it to all of us, and it'll be really helpful when the discussion happens. My experience with these kinds of conversations is that people are fearful when they think of the shapes of these buildings, and they're hopeful when they think of the uses of the buildings. And I would like to make a suggestion about the shapes, which is just that it seems to me that the issue of setbacks and widths, sidewalk widths that are at the people level rather than at the top level, become more and more important the higher things get. So I would encourage that whatever this committee recommends, ultimately that maybe you take that into account. I'm thinking about the much reviled building next to the high school, which is so close to the sidewalk and the sidewalk is so narrow. I think the town meeting would feel like it was taking a positive step forward if they felt like that wasn't going to happen again. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Beth Kolofchek, I live at 20 Russell Street for 6 years, though I was commuting before that. It's an R4 district, and I felt very welcome here in Arlington. I use my bicycle, I shop locally, and I find the specter of the density articles truly frightening. I believe that they are not what is best for Arlington, and I support the speakers prior to me who mentioned the scope of the master plan and how these particular density articles seem to deviate from that. I would like to say that the proposed loss of tree canopy and loss of green space is unacceptable. Environmental health is not negotiable. I think we've learned that in recent years. I would like to see climate resiliency addressed. I don't understand how we could be talking about revamping the zoning laws without an inclusion of climate resiliency. Full build-out of lots will impact Arlington's viability as a community in meeting climate incidents. Hence, it would be nice to see an environmental impact study. Seems like a common sense thing. Who do these articles benefit? I think they create the widest possible latitude for market rate real estate interests, and it hasn't been demonstrated to me how that produces more affordable housing than was documented by prior speakers, which was not particularly impressive. Affordable housing is great. I support affordable housing, as I believe everybody in this room does. We've already stated that. This seems to be a really big grab by a small, specific interest group, and I find that offensive. I find, and I did find the January 10th Housing Forum, which I attended, shocking and Orwellian. And there were comments there, besides that children could play in the bikeway, which is of course absurd, that we were being asked to choose doorknobs when we hadn't even bought the house yet. So I thought that was quite an apt comment. I appreciate your patience as I look through mine. So then again, emphasizing the master plan, healthy neighborhoods and protect open space. That's from the master plan. I don't see that at all in these density articles. I live in an R4 district, across the street is R2. I'm in a historic district anchored by the Valvoline. I love Arlington's diversity, economic, ethnic, in every possible way, and housing. I live in a townhouse.
It's a 2-family townhouse, it's not a 3-family townhouse. I'm horrified by what's gonna happen to R4 with your minimums and your total lack of permeable land. Again, environmental health is not negotiable, and I hope you will defend Arlington's environmental health as we move forward, as we work with Governor Baker on his interests and demands for climate resiliency. Arlington needs to be climate resilient. I'd like to see, if we're going to continue talking about the zoning bylaws, I'd like to see that in the conversation. So we may not be touching the zoning map, which was another comment of MAPPA and CHAP at the January Town Housing Forum. Don't worry, we're not touching the zoning map. No, you're creating an umbrella of new laws that will render it obsolete. That's unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Yes, sir.
My name is Peter Bloom. I live at 15 Jason Terrace. A few years from now, there'll be a lot of different angles from which you could evaluate how successful these various zoning changes will end up being viewed to be. One of them, and it's been touched on a couple of times tonight, but I wish it would get more attention, is to what degree, what percentage of the population will have felt sufficiently informed about the implications of this after the fact. I mean, I've been living where I am for 32 years, and I could scarcely identify the zoning for the various properties even near me, much less across the rest of the town. So I would encourage a better plan of communication to people that are hard to reach as far as what the zoning implications really are for where they live. The point was made just a few minutes ago to maybe provide a copy of this map to the members of whichever group of people were being referred to, but I would think that would be a good mailing to send to everybody in town. I think everybody should be better aware of what the zoning is for all the properties near where they live, so they can better assess. I think it's very easy to imagine the worst when you hear about these very, very large changes, and you don't necessarily know which properties you're going to apply to that are right near where you live. So I would encourage something like this to be sent out as a mailer so people in town are better informed about what they're really talking about. Because it's very easy to overemphasize what's going to happen. For that matter, I wish there was better use made of the main lobby in the town hall as a means of providing casual interaction with things like this. Exhibit space, there's exhibit cases in the front hall of the town hall that I think would be better used to communicate complicated things like this for people who are just passing by and wouldn't necessarily bother to go looking online to find out information. I mean, everyone who's here tonight has a much better chance of understanding what's at stake in terms of the specific properties near them than the average person who lives in town. And a couple of years from now, when whatever is passed, it'll be too late for them to know, because whatever they could have had a voice on, it already would have been decided for them. So that's pretty much what I had to say about that. One specific concern I just do want to add is that I really don't like the idea of including open spaces being on balconies and roofs. That really doesn't do much for the public at large. I didn't really believe that when I first heard it, but I just thought I'd add that in for my last 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank everyone for their patience this evening, the cooperation, smooth meeting overall. As always, we will continue to accept written comment via email. You can direct that to any and all, preferably, members of the board, and Jenny and Aaron as well. All of our email addresses are on the website. All of the zoning maps and zoning bylaws are readily available at the Arlington Town website. You can use Facebook in the Arlington list. You can easily use the Arlington website and find everything that's on there. And if you can't, Jenny will help you.
How do you find town meeting member addresses?
It's on the town.
We're going to you can come up and we'll talk about that. All right. So the next, thank you, Winnell. We're not done yet. I'm in charge. You can go.
I wanted to say.
The next hearing is Monday night, We will be discussing Articles 10, 11.
Oh, it's right here. Yeah.
We'll be discussing Articles 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 21. The same process will apply. If you cannot be here, please provide comments ahead of time in writing. As we did tonight, we've been making those part of the materials available to everyone online. So again, thank you all for your patience. Thank you all for your respect as we move through these difficult articles. The board itself will discuss and deliberate in detail on March 27th. And that concludes the public hearing for Articles 6, 7, 8, and 9. So we'll just, sorry. So we're just continuing that to the 27th. With that, no other business to attend to this evening, so.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.